Illustrator your whole life, pretty much?
I've sort of messed around with it my whole life, but I didn't really become a full-time illustrator till about 1989. It's sort of in a sense, a second career for me. I'm one of those guys that kind of kicked around, didn't have a real clear idea of what he wanted to do. So I wound up working as a programmer analyst for a couple of insurance companies. And long story short, the company I was working for in 1989 decided to move from New Hampshire out to Indiana, and I didn't want to go. And yeah, it's interesting. I've often thought that if the company didn't move, um, would I have ever had the nerve to jump in and try the illustration? But I thought, hey, now's the time to do it if you're going to do it. So I decided to give it a shot. I messed around with sort of done freelance cartooning on the side throughout the 80s. And what that means is you just draw up gag cartoons, send them into magazines, close a self-addressed stamped envelope in case they want to send them back. And yeah, I made some sales during that time, so I sort of kept in the zone. So when the company did leave, I thought, well, yeah, do the whole thing. I quickly learned that I couldn't really support myself or sustain the business just by doing gag cartooning. In fact, I'll tell you a little story here on myself. I'm embarrassed to say, but as I was doing the cartooning throughout the 80s, I wasn't smart enough, aware enough to realize that the golden age of magazine cartooning had passed by a long time ago. I really wish I could have been a cartoonist back in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, when there were lots of magazines using what's called general interest cartoons, no specific subject. You could send in whatever kind of sparked your fancy there. But geez, by the time the 60s, 70s, 80s rolled around, magazines were already in serious decline. And I think at the time I was doing it, looking back, probably the New Yorker and Playboy were probably the only two magazines that were actually commissioning the kind of cartoons that I enjoy, just general subjects. And I made some sales to, did a lot of golf cartoons, Golf Digest. I think all those magazines are gone. TV Guide, I don't know if that's even around anymore. At the time, they used a lot of cartoons. And one of my minor claims to fame is that I sold them a cartoon that actually referenced ABC News at the time. And the cartoon editor called me up one day and said, Rune Arledge, who was the head of ABC News, had seen the cartoon and he wanted to know if he could have the original for his office. So, yeah, I sent that along. So I did have some good times back then, but doing the full-time illustration work, I realized I would have to branch out and start doing, illustration as opposed to strict cartooning.
What were some of your favorite cartoons, like from the 30s, 40s, and 50s? Did any of those like inspire your work?
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. I hope I'm not going to draw a complete blank here. Trying to come up with names. Going way back to the 30s, I don't know if the name Peter Arno would strike a chord. He was one of the most popular New Yorker cartoonists back in the 30s. And personally, I think New Yorker cartoons have gone seriously downhill. But back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, there were an awful lot of strong gags, and Arno specialized in like nightlife. So his cartoons are filled with like chorus girls, nightclubs, people coming home at 6 in the morning, that sort of thing. Rich guys escorting chorus girls, a lot of businessmen type cartoons. He had a very distinct style that I've always admired, and you can still find his collected cartoons in like used bookstores, that sort of thing. One of my favorite kind of a guy that's completely off the radar now. There was a guy back in the 50s named John Gallagher, and he had a style that he was one of those guys that was gifted in that he could draw a cartoon and it looked beautiful, but it also had the quality of looking like he just dashed it off. And there's nothing I admire more in a cartoon or even an illustration. The energy that seems to be conveyed by a drawing, if it has that spontaneous dashed off look. You can work a cartoon to death. I've done it many times. You just sort of finesse all the life out of it. But his cartoons were very vibrant, and he specialized in like really crazy, wild gags that I really admire. Sight gags. A lot of even Arno's work. Going back to him for a second, his work was typical of a lot of New Yorker cartoons, in that many times the cartoons are what I think of as like illustrated gags, just one-liners, jokes almost. The picture is almost like an extra. You don't really need it. But with Gallagher's work, his cartoons were very visual. You'd look at the picture, you'd read the caption, and then you'd bust out laughing. And that's more my style. So they would be a couple of influences. And if you're old enough to remember Mad Magazine, which is no longer even published, that was a magazine that I grew up on. And there were a couple guys that worked for Mad, Jack Davis and Mort Drucker, and they were the guys that specialized in the movie satires that Mad used to do. As soon as a movie came out and was like a big hit, they would do a satire of it. And, you know, you take a movie like The Godfather or Jaws, any movie like that, you read the Mad Magazine satire. For me, that's like 100 times better than the movie itself. And Mort Drucker is probably my number one idol. He was like a cartoonist illustrator, a hyphenated guy, like I think of myself. And there wasn't anybody he couldn't caricature. They're just so good. And the thing that kills me about Mort Drucker doing like movie satires is that he could draw anybody from any angle and still make it look exactly like the person. In fact, one thing I read that really made me laugh out loud was back when Michael J. Fox was really, really hot, and he had movies like Back to the Future. He was on, I think, The Tonight Show, and somebody asked him the question of, when did you, obviously you're a big star now, when did you feel like you really made it? And he said, I knew I had made it when I opened Mad Magazine and saw my head drawn by Mort Drucker. That's how powerful Drucker's work was. And I also admire Drucker because he's the sort of guy that, I mean, if you're a caricature artist, you can really do a number on somebody. You can be really cruel. You can bring out their worst side and everything. Somehow, Mort Drucker managed to draw everybody in a way that was funny, but still made the person look good. I have no idea how he did that. He would do it with everybody, and that's just the sort of guy he was. So I admire his whole sensibility.
Awesome. So when you and can you maybe touch on like the main differences between just doing cartoons and illustrating? Like what is it about illustration that really distinguishes itself from cartoons?
Um, Illustrations have the type of constraints that a cartoon doesn't. I suppose you could argue that if you were doing a cartoon for, say, a trade journal is just a fancy name for a magazine that specializes in a certain trade, a certain profession. And back in the 80s, there were still a lot of those. I'll just make one up. Carpet World, Carpet Cleaning Digest, something very, very specific. It's not a market that I would have gone. Golf Digest, that's a better one. That's a better one. I did a lot of cartoons for them, and that was a fairly decent paying market. It wasn't in the same category as like the New Yorker or Playboy, but they had a good fee that they paid for cartoons. And the constraint would come in that the cartoons obviously had a reference golf in some way, but you were still free to, work it in whatever context seemed funny to you. If you wanted to have a guy playing golf in the middle of a city street, I mean, you could do it if you could figure out a way to make it work. Have a guy playing golf on a classic desert island cartoon, right? How many of those have been done? About a billion, but there's always another one. Figure out a way to make that work. So you have the constraint of a certain subject matter, and you're trying to make it fit. So in a cartoon, that's true, but in an illustration, it's much more true in that I started out doing editorial illustration for magazines, and that's largely disappeared now. But back in the day, if I got an assignment from like a business magazine and they were writing on a certain subject, let's see, what would be a good example? I did a lot of work for there's a lot of computer magazines, right? And back in the 80s, they were really starting to become a big thing. And you have titles like PC World, that sort of thing. There was like a Canadian version of a lot of those magazines had like American and Canadian and European versions. And the art director for what I think was the Canadian PC World, for some reason, really liked my stuff. So I would get a lot of assignments from him, and it would always be on a specific type of software or a new computer, something that had built-in constraints so that don't just give me a cartoon about computers, make it, this type of computer or this type of user, or they're trying to network in a certain way. So illustration, you'd have to really put on your thinking cap and ask yourself, how can I come up with, something that's mildly amusing, get people to look at it, attract attention. The whole idea of magazine illustration is to get people interested enough to start reading the story. That's why they're there. Same thing with header images nowadays in a post. So that's a part, believe it or not, of illustration that really agrees with me personally, because I like that sort of challenge. And the interesting thing too is that if you're doing a magazine illustration, you want to give the editor some choice. So instead of just thinking up a single concept, you're going to rough out 3 or 4 ideas and send it to the person and say, do any of these appeal to you? And most of the time they're going to say, I like number 2 or number 3. I like number 2, but could you work in what you did in number 1, kind of combine the two? You give them something to work with. So I like the challenge of trying to, come up with multiple concepts. And it's always very satisfying when somebody says, hey, that's right. That's just right. That's what we were hoping for. So I do like that kind of challenge, and it's a greater challenge than thinking up just a cartoon gag.
So it's basically just illustration is more closely tied to advertising and marketing material.
It is for me nowadays because gee, I can't remember the last time I did what I would think of as an editorial illustration. Tell you a quick funny thing. Probably my most unlikely client ever I've been doing, speaking of cartoons, I've been doing a cartoon for Fiddler magazine for, I think, going on 25, 30 years.
Wow.
I don't play the fiddle myself. I'm anything but a musician. I can't remember how I got involved. But obviously it's a quarterly, so it's a real small part of what I do. 4 cartoons a year, and I'm thinking up fiddle gags. I'm reading the magazine. I'm learning about fiddles. I do I know everything about fiddling now except how to play. I just have been with it a long time, but that's a type of editorial, and that you're doing something very specific for a real magazine that still exists in print form. But most of the editorial work, illustration, has completely gone away for me. So yes, you're right. I've been kind of transitioning to marketing in the last 10 years or so, probably. And in marketing, yes, there's definitely a very strong advertising component to whatever you're going to be drawing. I'm trying to think of a good example. Probably the most successful year I ever had was back in 2016. Um, I was doing a lot of work for Coca-Cola, which is probably the most prestigious client I've ever had. And that kind of segued over to, I did some work for Chick-fil-A restaurants because the person who was commissioning work for them had once worked for Coca-Cola and found out about my work that way. A good example, speaking of Chick-fil-A, where you're sort of combining, you're doing something online, it has a marketing component, and you're trying to attract customers, and you're trying to advertise Chick-fil-A, and you're trying to focus on something that they sponsor all at the same time. They still do, they're very big on football. Their home office is down in Atlanta. They have a very strong Southern vibe. So the college football, that's a big pairing. You probably know that, being down south yourself. And back in 2016, 17, 18, what they would ask me to do, they sponsored a particular bowl game, Chick-fil-A, the Peach Bowl. Okay, that's coming back to me. And somebody at the company decided, as a run up to the Peach Bowl, which is going to draw a massive crowd, and we're sponsoring it, to kind of engage people in the run up to that game, maybe 6, 8 weeks prior to the game. Somebody at our company is going to create a quiz about the two teams that are playing. Now, I don't know anything about football. I watch an occasional to this, but yeah, it's what they did was they sent me 10 questions, trivia questions about the two teams, and in the form of a quiz. So I had the questions, it was multiple choice. Am I going to be able to think up, let's see, one of the questions, I forget what the teams were, but all the quiz questions had to do with the two teams that are playing. And one of the quiz questions was, there's one guy that plays for this particular college team. He went on to play for a pro team, and his claim to fame is this. So was it this guy, this guy, this guy, or this guy? Multiple choice, 4 guys. I didn't know any of the names, but they gave me the answer. It's C, so and so. He's the guy that scored the touchdown in the Super Bowl. He used to play for, the whatever the college team was. And so I have to think of an illustration for that question. And I think what I did for that particular one, I drew like little caricatures of these 4 guys. talk about like you're trying to be a quick study here. You're looking up what these four guys look like. You never heard of them. You get on the internet, you find pictures of all of them. You figure that this quiz is going to be looked at by people that go to Chick-fil-A. They're going to know football. They're going to know who these people are. They're going to know what they look like. So I did little caricatures. I think I drew them as bobbleheads, the four guys as bobbleheads in football uniforms. And it was just to illustrate this one question. So you're sort of doing this, you're coming up with something that's, you got the constraints, football, you got to do the research. At the same time, it's going to be posted on Chick-fil-A's site, and people are going to go there, and they're going to form a certain impression, not just of the game. Should I watch it? Is this really interesting? The quiz has got to reflect well on Chick-fil-A. So I can't really say that I'm sweating the whole time I'm doing the drawing, thinking this has got to work. My whole career depends on this. They won't ask me to do any more work if I don't do a good job. It's nothing like that. But you're right about the marketing. You're trying to do something that has an editorial component in that it's got to fit this quiz question, and it's got to look good. And at the same time, it's going to be on the site of a company that's obviously in the business of selling food, trying to get customers into their restaurant. So when people go to their site, you want it to be entertaining, marketing the football game. You want them to hopefully maybe tune into the game, and you want them to be left with a good impression of Chick-fil-A, so they'll go in and eat chicken sandwiches in the future. So yeah, that's an interesting example. It's sort of like the grand combination of what somebody like me really likes. It's a big challenge. You're trying to make an illustration that fits the quiz, the parameters, and you're trying to get it so that in kind of an indirect way, it has a strong positive marketing message as well. Sorry, long-winded answer to a very
No,
simple question.
no, that's what we like. You know, working with these big companies, I'm sure is it requires a lot of nuance because you have to consider, things like their message as well as your message and how much of your personality should be in this compared to what they're trying to do. So you're really trying to match styles and personalities and messages because you want it to be representative of you, even though
Yep.
you're working for someone else.
A very perceptive observation, if I may say so. That's exactly right. I think that's where an illustrator has to have. I don't consider myself a highly social person, but I do know that I need to always be marketing myself when I'm talking to somebody, like even like just talking to you, having a friendly chat here. I'm conscious of the fact that, I hope I'm not being coming off like a complete goofball here, but you're trying to make a good impression. And when you do work with like a client, like somebody they're all very nice. I don't want to pretend there's like I feel like I'm in danger when I'm working with these people of being written off. No, a lot of these people couldn't be nicer. They have to be too. They're in constant contact with all sorts of people that they're commissioning work to. But yeah, you have to try to maintain, a positive social aspect with the people you're working with. And you're right. It would be a big mistake if I was an illustrator that was so full of myself. And I know there are people that do make that mistake, not just illustrators, but like writers or actors or anybody that does make some sort of a creative output. If they get so egotistical that, this is the way I see it. This is my vision, vision with quote marks. This is my vision. This is how it has to work. You get into like take it or leave it territory. And that's not going to work with either an editor for editorial work. Certainly, it's not going to work for a marketing director that always has to be conscious of the impression that their product or service is making on the general public. So, the ideal when you work with any sort of a business is to, yes, I know they're looking to me to give them a little something that they don't have, that they can't do for themselves. But at the same time, getting back to the idea of constraints, they're hoping my creativity, my imagination can be channeled so that it fits their overall marketing message, it fits their business profile. They're going to have a certain reputation. They don't want anything to endanger that. Um, which brings me to another, this might be an interesting point. Um, keep the marketing, and I'll just push that off to one corner here and say that um, back in the day, there was a guy that always asked me to do a Christmas cover for a magazine, and it was for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Spokane, Washington. He was like the creative director for all of their media operations. Now, this guy himself was very, very funny. I enjoyed working with him no end. But here he is. He's got a magazine that goes out to all of the clergy, all of the parishioners in this particular Catholic diocese. So doing a cover that is like super crazy and, totally off the board there is not going to work. He was open to all sorts of humor, and we had a lot of fun with those covers, and I enjoyed the assignment enormously. But getting back to your original question, circling back here, I'm off on a tangent again, but the idea of staying within the constraints, but still maybe pushing the envelope a little bit, especially because I'm working with somebody that was almost as crazy as I am as far as like the humor is concerned. What I would do working with this guy is I always gave him 5 ideas. I was really into it. I love Christmas. The idea of doing a Christmas cover, perfect match for me. So what I would do is I would do 5 ideas that I thought were interesting, funny, germane, and would fit. And then I would do a sixth one that pushed the envelope, that did something, a little crazy. So that was a case where I was playing it safe, but as an illustrator, somebody bringing something to the job, I was pushing the envelope a little bit, but I didn't put my friend into a position where he had to use that. He almost always wrote back and said, "I like number 6 the best, but we're gonna go in number 2 or number 4 or whatever." But it was just sort of a fun thing. Um, but to answer, sort of get back to your question, you wouldn't want to do anything. You wouldn't want to put a marketing person in a position where, oh no, I've invested a lot of time working with this illustrator. Now I find out he's going to dig in his heels. He wants to do something that is going to jeopardize my position in the company. No, no, you stay away from that. And so that is an interesting challenge for an illustrator. You want it to represent yourself. You want your style to be in there. Every illustrator has a certain sensibility they bring. And I'd like to think that when people ask me to do something like that, they're aware of that. They've done their homework, they've looked at my website, they've seen what I've done and said, yes, I think this guy can help us, but you don't want to jeopardize their product or service. Sorry, another diatribe.
Oh no, that's perfectly fine. And it's funny you mentioned the term goofball because I think sometimes people think of the word goofy and they just kind of write it off, but it's not, it doesn't have a negative connotation to it. Goofy is a good style because it's fun and it appeals to families, right? Like anybody can,
Yeah,
it's like one of those, it's almost like Like you can consider like Simpsons kind of goofy because there's jokes for adults that
Oh,
are
yeah,
safe for
yeah,
kids to watch sometimes,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know. But I think the goofy zany thing, um, you know, with limitations, you can bring all that into illustration from cartoon work, and that's really separates the difference. Maybe you just tone it down a little bit. And
yeah,
I think that
yeah,
people really find it appealing because something that you can do with illustration that you can't really seem to do with photography is to bring all those elements of humor.
yeah.
It's hard to like capture a funny moment with a camera.
Oh,
It has to be video, right? You have to watch
yeah,
something unfold.
yeah.
Whereas with illustration, you can actually illustrate something unfolding, even if it's a still moment in time. So it's
Oh,
impressive.
beautifully. I want to hire you as my agent. That is exactly very close to, being the message that I've tried to put out over the years. Yeah, there's certain things that you can only do in an illustration, and hopefully that's what gives them their real power, I think. And that's beautifully said. That's it exactly. To really sound pretentious, I read something once where somebody described illustration as having it portrayed a certain truth that a photograph can't, which sounds like a real contradiction because, I mean, a photograph, there's the reality. It's frozen right there. You've got every fine detail. And an illustration is always more subjective because it's a product of someone's unique imagination. And yet, there are certain kinds of truth that like are below logic. They're in a kind of a subconscious sphere. You can't even put them into words sometimes. And an illustrator will sometimes pick up on that. I don't think that they actually think about it much. I know I don't. I will look at some of my old work sometimes and think, oh, I think I see what I was doing there, but I'm not really aware of it at the time. But your caricatures are a good example. Getting back to that, you could look at a caricature and it brings out a certain aspect of a personality that you would never see in a photo. And it is admittedly very subjective, but sometimes you look at something like that and you find yourself nodding and you're not quite sure exactly why, but you're sort of thinking, yeah, I didn't see that before, but that's true. And a lot of people like the little things built into an illustration too. You can work in you don't want to go too crazy, but there are little aspects of a drawing, objects. A big part of illustration is knowing what to leave out, what to put in. A photograph is almost it's too much sometimes. It's got everything. An illustration can both it can narrow the focus, and if you want to bring out a certain aspect that, getting back to marketing, if you want people to, notice something that might slip by in a photograph, you can kind of um, come up with a concept that brings something, specifically to a person's attention. And I think the goofiness too. This is strictly a personal feeling. I think we're on the same wavelength. Obviously, a lot of people don't feel this way, but if you could get something that has a little humor in it, it doesn't have to be a lot, but if you get something that just draws people in, then they're more apt to interact with, whatever else is there. If you can't capture somebody's attention, and I think there's a likability factor too. If I don't have a good feeling when I look, at an illustration or even a photo or it's even true of like something like a LinkedIn profile photo. You see some photos that just, I don't want to even know about this person. Other photos, I'm going to take a look. And that's certainly true for illustration. But yeah, the good thing about humor is I think you were just saying a moment ago is it does sort of invite people in, get their attention, and creates a nice vibe that it's very good for marketing and very good for editorial as well.
Yeah, it's more appealing to look at something that requires um, creative passion. Um,
Yeah,
you know, and not
yeah,
to obviously there are incredible photographers that can do a lot of beautiful things, but I think the difference is with illustration, you can do the things like even something as simple as the way you shade an object can
yeah.
really impact the reader's perception of a cartoon or a message, whatever it is you want it to be.
That's so true. Just one small thing to, I remember doing a drawing once where I looked at it and it seemed very flat. It was good. It looked good. It looked right. And yet I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was missing. But all I did was like add a certain shadow around an object. And all of a sudden it stood out and made the drawing much, much stronger. And one of the most interesting things for me when I work sometimes is I won't know until I'm almost done or I am done, and a little light bulb will go off, and I'll say, I didn't see it before, but I need to leave this out, or I need to put this in, or I need to change the color scheme or something. One of the most interesting things for me too is I do all my drawing by hand. I think a lot of people work on digital tablets now, but I do the line drawings by hand, and I'm doing a pencil drawing, and I'm going to ink the drawing, and then I'm going to scan it into my computer and do the finish in an image editing program. One interesting thing for me is that many times I will do a pencil drawing and I will be inking it, and I get done with the inking and I look at it, and without realizing it, I have like forgotten to ink certain pencil lines. And it usually dawns on me when I pick up my eraser. I've got kind of a messy piece of paper, little bits of pencil, and I'm going to erase the pencil smudges. And I go to start erasing, and I see that there are certain lines that should have been inked, but they weren't. And I realized my subconscious was at work there telling me that's not needed. That's like impinging on the main image. And I will leave it out without even realizing that that's what I've done. And so you sort of develop like a little bit of an instinct for it. And I'll bet that's true for yourself when you write one of your poems. I bet if you revise it or you're writing a certain line, I bet you surprise yourself a lot of times by saying, I need to change that one thing. And suddenly I see where this word is better or whatever.
Yeah, it can vary quite a bit. Sometimes I don't know. I don't have a defined process per se. Sometimes I just write it and send it. Sometimes I
Yeah.
agonize over it. It just depends.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but with the illustrating, so it's almost like you're there's multiple phases of what you go through before you send something. So you get the input, you draw something black and white, and then you bring it to life with color.
Right. Right.
So when you're adding the color, you know, is it something conscious? Like, okay, when you're writing it or when you're drawing it with your pencil, are you saying this coat will be blue eventually? Or is it something like when you go to ink it, that's when the color comes in? Like, how do you go about that process?
Oh boy. I've got to confess something here. Now, is anybody else listening to this? Just the two of us, right? Okay. I'm not a good color person. That's something that I struggle with. And to answer the last question you just asked, when I'm drawing it, no, I'm not thinking in color. I'm just thinking the line drawing, black and white. When I get done, that's the time to address the color. And There was a time years ago where I was so shaky with color that I would consult like color wheels, and I go to websites where artists thought deep thoughts about colors. This works with this, don't do this, never put these two together. And I would agonize over that. There's like some crazy six letters, numbers, you've probably seen them. I forget what they're called, hex codes for different colors and all these fine shades of every color in the book. And I don't do that anymore. That's just too much for me. That overloaded my brain. But when I'm doing the color, I will usually ask myself, are there elements here where the colors almost define themselves? If you get back to like, say you're drawing something by the seashore and you've got like, say, a palm tree in the drawing or whatever. I mean, you got kind of a light brown trunk, you got like, green leaves. You can talk different shades, but a palm tree sort of defines itself. You got sand, it could be a little yellow, gold, whatever, but at least you're in the ballpark. The trouble comes if you've got a lot of competing colors. I give you a great example. One of the projects that I've been working on all year, doing a lot of agonizing over. I've been working on this children's book. I always wanted to do one, and it's way too long. I got carried away, and the drawings, a lot of them are, I think it's probably the best work I've ever done, but the drawings are, pretty complex and everything. And there's a sequence in this story where the scenes are underwater. So it's a children's book. I don't have to worry about getting everything exactly right, but it's the fun element is stressed. There's a scene underwater where I'm drawing all sorts of underwater creatures. I've got octopuses in there. I've got all sorts of fish, and you come to do the colors, and you're all over the map, right? And I know that I agonized over what colors to use because I don't want them all to be like tropical colors. That doesn't quite fit. But they can't be. I mean, think of the average fish. I'm not a fisherman, but I did some when I was a kid. And if you just go out in the lake and fish, you got fish that are like brown, gray, maybe, dark purplish. You might have a sunfish with some orange in it, but the run of the mill fish is a pretty, blah character. So
Right.
coming up with a color scheme for, there was this one page where there's like probably 100 small fish, and I've got to get different colors for all of them. I want it to be fun for a kid. I don't want to repeat too many colors too often, but trying to work out that color scheme. I forget how long I spent on it, but you tell yourself, don't try to do it all at once. Figure out what colors work, what don't, space it out. You're kind of working it through, but there's a lot of experimentation for me. And like you just said with poems, sometimes boom, they just fall together. Other times you're struggling. There are pages in that children's book where I knew what colors were, appropriate, and it all flowed. But other times you struggle with it. I wish I was better at color. It's not my strong suit. See me walking down the street with mismatched shirt, pants. That's me. I can't even get the colors right for the stuff I'm wearing. So it could be a struggle.
Right. Well, perhaps a coloring book is in order. You know, let people
Yeah.
choose their own. You just worry about the
That's
drawing.
what I should have done. I should have bought a bunch of coloring books and just, yeah, got some crayons and experimented with color. Why didn't I think of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Um, is this so? That will be your first book, or first children's book, or
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's something that I plan to self-publish. It is too long. I remember reading somewhere, I don't know if this is still true, but um, I remember reading that the average children's book is about 32 pages. And I've seen books that are a lot shorter than that. Um, I don't know if that's still true. My book is about 65 pages, which sounds, and the embarrassing thing was I told myself going into it, don't make it too long. I mean, you haven't even self-published anything before. Don't keep it simple, keep it short. Don't get carried away on the drawings, the length. So I forgot all of that. I made all those mistakes. But on the plus side, since it's for young children, there's only a single sentence on every page. So I'm thinking that even at 65 pages, it's a real page turner and it's not going to take that long to read. It's not like the kind of children's books I remember when I was a kid. Yeah, you'd have a drawing, but then you'd have like, I don't know, 8, 10 sentences on
Yeah.
a page. And, it took some time to read through it. So that's a plus, but it's very visual. I've always liked the visual humor. Talking about that guy John Gallagher, visual gags, sight gags. That's the sort of thing I like. So I'd like to think that most of the pages in this particular book are, have a strong visual humor element to them. So hoping that all comes together and. Yeah, I'll let you know. I know you'll want to, order several copies for yourself and all your friends. So.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I still have a couple young ones, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Oh, good.
Um, how have you been able to? Have you found it more challenging, or just as challenging, historically speaking, um, adapting your illustration work to cultural changes? Like, has that been an issue at all, or is it?
It's something that I'd like to think that I've been doing this since 89, and obviously a lot of change has changed over the last 30 years. And obviously, representing, different races, different ethnicities, that's a big part of the culture now. I'm old enough so that when I was a kid, you didn't see basically anybody in a children's book that wasn't white. It was just that's the way it was. I don't think anybody was trying to be disrespectful. That was just the culture. That's the way things worked. And you didn't think about it. But nowadays, it's exact opposite. It's funny too. I can go off on a tangent on that too. Sometimes it kills me to watch like a commercial on TV, and you've got all these people. They're watching TV or something. They're watching football together, and I don't know what's in an ad for, some drink or some food or something. And you've got all these people crammed into like a living room, and there's like two Latinos, there's two black people, there's two white people, there's two Chinese people. Hey, it all is nice and everything, but how many super mixed racial ethnic groups are watching TV together in, the same room? There might be some, but I think by and large, that's probably not true. Sometimes it looks over the top. So what I try to do nowadays, and this is true of the children's book, getting a little hoarse here. Let me take a drink of
It's
coffee.
okay.
The trick, I think, in doing illustration nowadays is to work that diversity in as natural way as possible. And talking about the children's book, um, I'm a little superstitious. I haven't told anybody at all what the plot is or anything, but I will reveal to you that there is a scene where the protagonist is washed up on a beach, and there are like three girls who are maybe, I drew them so that they're probably middle school, and they have just built a rocket ship. In the background, you see a rocket ship that's cobbled together with like all sorts of scrap metal stuff they found on the beach. Obviously, one look and you know that's never going to fly. Just a bunch of junk cobbled together, but it's got different pieces. It's very funny to look like. It looks like a rocket ship. It's just like something like made out of found art. And these three girls, there's like a white girl, a black girl, and an Asian girl. And yet I drew it so that it looked to me just like a natural pairing. I know intellectually, logically, I know I'm putting that in there so that any girl who is reading this, or anybody, any parent, any child, is just going to see that and take it in stride. Everybody, there's going to be a certain representation there where obviously I don't have a Latino in there. I don't have what else would be left out? There's a lot of like I don't have an Eskimo. I don't have somebody from like India. Um, but I've got like I'm sort of in the ballpark. I've got enough diversity in there so that if I tried to do what I was just talking about a minute ago and have like 10 girls there and they're all represented, wouldn't work. So I've just got sort of three. I've condensed it and I've tried to make it look natural. And one other thing that I did when I was doing that particular page is I don't like being preached to myself. I don't like being hit over the head with certain politically correct things. And but one thing I am very aware of is that um, girls need to be empowered to think that they can do any sort of technical or scientific thing. When I was a kid, I'm so old that like people didn't think, there were certain things that girls should do. Girls always took home ec, boys always took shop, that sort of thing, and never the two shall meet. And all of that has changed, thankfully. So when I drew that particular page, my hope was that I wasn't thinking so much of the diversity in like the ethnicity, the race. I've got each girl with like a tool in their hands. Somebody's got a hammer, somebody's got a saw. I forget what the other one's got, a level maybe or something. Didn't have a lot of work to squeeze power drills in or anything, but I think the line is that one of the girls is saying to the protagonist, we just built a rocket ship. Want to go for a ride? The gimmick in the book that runs all through it is the protagonist is like propelled. He's like in one of those old silent films. It's like one chase sequence after another. He's basically going around the world, propelled by events beyond his control. He just washed up on a beach. There are these girls. They got a rocket ship. You ready to blast off? And next thing you know, he's rocketing off in space. But when I drew that, I said, I'm not going to belabor this, but I think having three girls with tools in their hands and they just built a rocket ship, hopefully there's going to be a few girls out there that read that book and on a subconscious level, they're going to be saying to themselves, yeah, you want to build something like that? That's something girls do. So it's just kind of an under the radar thing. You don't know if anybody's going to get it, but that's one of the pages where I was sort of thinking, I got a chance here to do a little social good without preaching, without hitting people over the head. So that was my approach.
No, I think that's a great approach because it's unreasonable to expect the entire thing to be orchestrated perfectly so that every skin tone has representation. I think the most genuine people would be understanding that the important part is that um, the girls are being empowered to be creative, to use engineering skills and be helpful. If they want to help this creature, they want to invite them on their journey, something that they created and built and they're proud of. So I think the overall message is very positive.
Oh, it's very great to have your feedback on that point. That's good to hear. Hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, oh, we're hitting an hour now, close to it. Do you want to keep going a little bit more? Do you want to make a part two? I don't know. However you feel, we can keep going a little bit longer. But since I've been doing these, I come to find that an hour is typically like the best stopping point. Um, I feel
Yeah,
like we're barely scratching the surface though, so I would like to do another one with you. Um,
that
how do you feel?
that sounds like we're right in sync there. That would be good for me too. I feel like I've been yeah, talking too much. That's one of my problems once I get wound up. So yeah, doing a part two, I'd have absolutely no problem. Been a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you and actually seeing what you really look like and everything. Very
Yeah,
cool. I'm a big fan of yours. This is a pleasure. I really want to thank you again for asking me on. And if you want to do another go round, hey, count me in.
absolutely. Because I'd be interested to know your thoughts on a lot more topics. I mean, I feel like we could probably talk for 10 hours. So,
Yeah, I got that
um,
feeling too.
but you gotta have a good starting point.
Excellent.
Um, I guess like one of my last questions for you would be something like, have you thought about? Or I know that obviously most of your work is kind of solitary. Like, and you used to reach out to people that like did stuff with Collar. Do you do any kind of collaborative work, or is it all mostly just like a marketing agency or a company that wants marketing done for them approaches you? Or is there any work that you do where you work as a team?
Oh boy, good question. Let me think. A good example um, that comes to mind straight away. I can't. I don't know if your part of your question would be, have I ever taken the initiative to like contact a writer or another artist and say, I have this idea for a project. Would you like to get together and work on it? I can't remember actually doing that, but one thing that has happened on occasion is that a certain assignment will require collaboration from another creative person. And a good example of that would be back when I mentioned Coca-Cola earlier on, and the work that I did for them when they first contacted me, they had something called a social media hub. They had a guy that I think he'd been doing the job for a year, and he explained to me that Coca-Cola's idea was to have kind of their own media platform. It would be sort of a combination of YouTube. It would have elements of what we know now as the Medium platform. There'd be writing, there'd be illustration, there'd be video, and it had combinations of like Facebook, Twitter. Their hope was that they would have a platform where they could build up a fan base where they wouldn't just talk about Coca-Cola, but hopefully they could work that in a limited way. But they were trying to come up with subjects that would attract people and just keep them on their site. So what they asked me to do, they didn't come to me and say, give us this illustration as like a standalone thing. They said, we've hired a guy to write a post about such and such, and it's going to be on this subject. Could you come up with an illustration that will fit what he's doing? So, in a sense, it would not be that different than if somebody called me up and said, we've just read this great poem by Gideon 6ix, and it's got highly visual elements in it. And we want you to do the header illustration for his poem. And here's the poem, come up with some ideas and then do it. It would be similar to that. And they said, here's what this guy wrote. And we want you to come up with drawings that will fit it. And, you know, we want the Coca-Cola thing to somehow be in there. I'll bore you with one little thing here. A good example of this, of what happened, was I love this guy that I worked with. What's his name? Charles. One of his books was actually nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. What's he doing now? I've lost touch with him. Charles McNair is his name. Charles McNair. And he's written several books. I'm not sure how he got involved with Coca-Cola, but he's very funny. All of his stuff was funny. So we were a perfect match together. And believe it or not, he actually wrote a post about Italian baseball. Now, if you think Italy, does baseball come to mind?
No.
No, I didn't even know they played baseball over there. And his story in a nutshell was that when he got married, he and his wife went to Italy for their honeymoon. They were having dinner in a restaurant, and a guy walked up to his table and said, "Are you an American?" "Yes," he says. "Do you play baseball?" He says, "Well, I played in high school." He says, "We want you to be on our team," right? He's never seen this guy before. The Verona Arsenal, that's a baseball team over here. Baseball team, it exists over there, super niche sport, baseball. They talked him into, they said, "If you will agree to play for our baseball team, we will find a job for you. We will find an apartment for you. We'll find a job for your wife." Okay, this was the story. So he told the story about his season with the Verona Arsenal. And my job was to come up with illustrations that would fit this story. And the idea jumped into my head. He described all of his teammates in great detail. They were all eccentrics. And one guy, the catcher, he owned a restaurant on the side. So every time these guys played a game, win or lose, they would all adjourn to his restaurant and have a big party. So I wound up drawing an illustration where a restaurant sitting where I could work in Coca-Cola bottles in the baseball team. And it was the craziest assignment I ever had. I said to the editor, you know, he's described all of his teammates so well, and they're all nutcases. What do you think about the idea of my drawing up like bubblegum cards for all these guys? I'll just make something up. He says, go for it, you know. So it turned out to be this assignment that wound up, I did a lot of extra stuff. It was a very lucrative assignment. I don't know if I ever had more fun on an assignment before or since, but I was collaborating with a guy trying to illustrate his lived experience, and with the additional challenge of figuring out a way that I could work Coca-Cola in some respect. The one image that comes to my mind that I remember very clearly is I drew an illustration where I had a Coca-Cola bottle and I had it sitting next to a plate of spaghetti. And the spaghetti is this big mound. And instead of meatballs in the spaghetti, there were baseballs. Okay. That was the Verona Arsenal Coca-Cola baseball story. I think that was used as the header image. So yeah, that would be an example of I didn't reach out to somebody, but I was sort of thrown together with them. And even though that was true, you still have the collaborative aspect where you have to work with people, you have to get along with people. And the writer and I just struck it off, and we're still good friends.
I thought it would be cool to like go back and see some of that work. Um, you have, I know you have some of your work posted. Is that kind of work posted on your website, or is
I can send you a link. I did do a post about that. Yeah, it's out there somewhere. If you'd like
yeah?
to send it, I'll just turn it around and send you a link to the whole thing.